All right, guys, today we are going to be reacting to why do Germans eat raw pork? That's a good question. Let's jump in and see what's going on.
Sponsored by Rosetta Stone. This raw pork sandwich comes straight out of Germany and it's called Hackepeterschrippe. And no, I'm not crazy. This is actually one of the most common old school snacks here. People will even eat it for breakfast. And look, I get it. You're wondering what psycho eats raw pork before noon. I do. And by the end of this video, you might too. Because today we're answering one big question. Why is Germany the only place on earth where eating raw pork is not just accepted, but a straight up mainstream tradition enjoyed by millions every day? Let's start with this though. Eating raw meat is certainly not just a German thing. A lot of countries have their own raw meat traditions. Japan's got sashimi, France brings you beef tartare, Italians have carpaccio, South Americans whip up ceviche, and the Middle East offers kibbeh with raw lamb. And that's just to name a few. So what's the deal here? How come the whole world gets a pass on eating raw anything, but when Germans eat raw pork, everybody freaks out? Well, history and biology have a lot to do with this. As humans, we learned over centuries that some meats are riskier to consume raw than others, chicken and pork being on top of that list. Before we even knew that these meats were simply more likely to be host to dangerous parasites or bacteria like salmonella, we already taught each other to stay out of harm's way, and this wisdom got passed down from generation to generation. You know the drill. Pork in particular has been deemed unclean and impure by entire religious communities like Judaism and Islam. That's why most of us grow up knowing that if we don't fully cook our chicken or pork, we're probably gonna spend a very long and uncomfortable night in the bathroom. But would we really? The truth is, if pigs are raised in a clean, healthy, controlled environment, and the meat is then handled and stored within the safe temperature, which is below 4 degrees Celsius, all the way from slaughter to consumption, that is, the risk of anything nasty happening is actually extremely low. Millions of not dead Germans should be proof that, in fact, raw pork can be just as safe to consume as that fancy sashimi you paid $30 for last week.
Not only that, eating raw meat, especially pork or beef, it has a lot of vitamin D and vitamin B12. Well, you guys need a lot because you guys live in a very cold place.
Speaking of sashimi, by the way, there are parts of Japan where chicken sashimi, called torisashi, is actually a thing. Sashimi. They get away with this because of very strict hygiene standards, the use of special breeds, and extremely fresh preparation. In addition to that, very careful handling and only using specific cuts of the chicken that are less prone to bacterial growth, like the inside of a chicken breast, minimize but don't actually fully eliminate the risk of contamination through salmonella and things like that, which is very likely why it always has been and still remains a very niche delicacy. But when it comes to eating raw pork, we have Germany, where this type of Hackepeterschrippe is anything but niche. In fact, it's as mainstream of a snack as you can possibly imagine. Heck, it's even a cultural cornerstone of German food if you ask me. So let's talk about it. This ready-to-eat raw pork is actually called Met over here. The word Met is a very old German word, originally meaning something like meal or food in general. It's actually also the root of the English word meat. But over time, in modern German, it narrowed specifically to mean lean, ground, raw pork. And while today Met is mostly eaten raw, it hasn't always been like that. Just over 100 years ago, people would cure, dry, and smoke their Met to make Metwurst, which is Met sausage, and it still
It's
exists
basically,
today.
yeah, it's like a, oh my God. We eat those here. How do you call it? How do you call it? You can buy them in the gas station. I forgot. Meat sticks. Meat sticks?
Looks a little something like this, and I think we can give it a try.
Yeah,
so
it
this
tastes
is
very
a
good.
classic
Damn.
Metwürstchen, or a little Met sausage. Let's snap it open. You
Yep.
can tell the inside looks kind of raw, but because it's cured and smoked, we can actually eat this raw. Very well seasoned, nice and smoky, which I appreciate because I love smoked shit, and just a great overall snack.
And very healthy as
That
well.
is not actual fresh raw pork. So let's leave that behind and get back to our question: when and why did Germans start eating raw Met? We're almost at the answer, but first, now let me remind you that eating raw pork safely requires two things. First, very strict food safety regulations. But let's face it, this is something us Germans have always been very good at. Just check the German laws on selling minced meat and you will know exactly what I mean. For example, if you're trying to sell Met for raw consumption, it very crucially has to be minced on the day of sale because bacteria on meat grows mostly on the surface, and once you mince meat, there's just a lot of surface area. And through this entire process, all the way from slaughterhouse to table, the meat has to be refrigerated impeccably, which requires the second important thing: cooling technology. Cooling in general shaped the modern food industry like nothing else. And once it became widely accessible,
100%. That's, man, that really changed the ball game. Cooling really changed the ball game.
Here in Germany some 100+ years ago, it technically made consuming raw pork viable. It's just that nobody was doing it, so somebody just had to start doing it. And for that, we gotta travel back in time to Berlin in the early 1900s. Look, when people think of German food, they mostly conjure up images of Bavarian food, like pretzels and Weisswurst. But Berlin has its very own historic food culture, though much less glamorous. I went down a rabbit hole reading these two incredible books, which I'm gonna link below, and they talk about Berlin's very modest, very humble, very unphotogenic cuisine, but damn does it have character. We got things like meatloaf and cream, eggs in mustard sauce, beer-braised carp, potato soup, you know, that kind of stuff. Today, Berlin is a very cosmopolitan city, and these dishes have sort of faded into obscurity because people enjoy all the delicious international foods they can have today, which I kind of get, but which is also a shame because some of these sound like amazing meals. But what matters for us today is that among these old-school Berlin dishes are a few extremely simple ones that made up Berlin's original tavern culture. They were the bar snacks of Berlin in the 1900s. And one of those snacks, you guessed it, Hackepeterschrippe. Hackepeter refers to fresh meat that has been seasoned with just salt, pepper, and diced white onions, sometimes topped with
fresh meat. What does that mean? Fresh meat. I think he meant fresh meat, right?
A few slices of pickle. Weirdly, Hackepeter translates to chopped Peter, which, don't worry, I think Peter is fine. This name doesn't really mean anything. It's just that back then we also had dishes like Strammer Max, Tight Max, or Stolzer Heinrich, Proud Henry, which these names didn't ever mean anything. Right. It was just a marketing trend to give very simple dishes these kind of fancy, funny, weird names. Now, according to both these books, Hackepeter can actually be traced to one particular pub in Berlin that started serving the dish in 1903. You gotta know that back in the day, there was a little bit of competition between these pubs because they were trying to win over customers by offering these fancy, funny, creative snacks. What remains a little bit of a mystery to me is why people were so ready to accept eating raw meat back in the day all of a sudden, but my theory is that there were two major reasons. First, they were already familiar with virtually the exact same stuff in cured sausage form. And second, Hackepeter was often called the poor man's tartar, as in beef tartar. And with French food being the undisputed #1 for Europe's rich and famous back then, I feel like getting a little taste of that fanciness for a lot less money and at your local bar was a pretty solid offering. Either way, that one Berlin pub that supposedly came up with the dish, well, it closed over a century ago, so we're not going there today, but their new viral snack, well, that certainly thrived. Just a few decades later, Hackepeter went from trend to tradition. Eating raw meat or making a little Hackepeter sandwich was so convenient that it became a household staple about
convenient and fast. You can do it right away if you want to.
As quickly as refrigerators did. And with Germans' love for pork, it just never went away. In fact, this brings us to possibly the darkest chapter in all of German food history. In the 1970s, Germany hit peak meat and committed one of the worst culinary atrocities ever. We invented the Mettigel, the raw pork hedgehog. Are you confused? Because you should be. Watch closely because I'm going to show it to you once and then never again. Viewer discretion is advised. Here it is in all its glory. And I'm truly sorry you had to.
What the hell is that? Why? Why would...
see this. People actually thought raw pork sculptures were cool back in the day. And while I like to think that opinions have shifted, people still make Mettigel to this day. They're kind of doing it ironically, like as a joke, but it's the type of joke where you're not sure if it really is a joke because people are enjoying it a little bit too much. Looking at you, Matt Damon? Anyway, if you visit an old school German tavern or hit an old school German breakfast place, chances are you'll still be able to order a Hackepeterschrippe, or Mettbrötchen, as most of Germany outside of Berlin calls it. But you can also easily make it yourself. Schrippen, or simple white bread rolls, are available all over Germany. We just gotta slice them in half and we'll be good to go. Most butchers or grocery store meat counters will have Hackepeter in Germany, which by law must be ground that day and is usually, but not always, pre-seasoned with salt, pepper, and onions. I actually prefer eating it straight out of the fridge, not necessarily for food safety concerns, but just because I feel that the texture of Hackepeter is much nicer when it's cold. If your met is unseasoned or you just like it a little bit more flavorful, you can add extra salt, pepper, and freshly diced onions. I know there are big debates over whether it's a good idea or not to add butter to your Hackepeter Schrippe. I am firmly on the pro-butter side of this debate. Okay. A lot of people will tell you this is heresy, but I say you do you. Now let's add some met. A lot of people like to go for a lot of met here, basically adding an entire patty's worth of met. But me personally, I like doing a modest amount. I think it tastes much, much better this way. Not more than that, actually, in my book. Let's do a bit of salt.
You know what's crazy? I was thinking about a little bit, a little bit more into the heavier side. But he's just going a little bit moderate.
Now I want to add some extra pepper, but I'm very bad at doing it with one hand. Some diced onions, very importantly. There's also a debate over topping your Hackepeter-Schrippe with little slices of pickle, but I personally like to not do that because I feel like the pickle overpowers the very delicate taste of the meat. But if you really like pickles, I'd rather suggest eating one on the side, basically like a palate cleanser between bites, and not putting it on the sandwich itself. So there you have it, as simple as it possibly could be. A good old classic Hackepeter-Schrippe. L'chaim. I'm gonna savor this moment. You know, truly, a lot of times, the simplest things are the best. Right in this moment, I'm a very happy man. After eating this, I just want to reaffirm that you should definitely not skip the butter. I repeat, do not skip the butter. It's amazing. The raw pork, it's very refreshing. It's delicate. It's mild. That's also the reason I really like it cold, because it kind of highlights that freshness. Every element of this dish has a place. The salt enhances the natural flavors. The pepper helps to mellow out the raw edge of the meat. The onions add sharpness and a little juicy crunch. This might be the simplest snack in the world, but at least for me, it's also one of the best. It just
very
works.
High in protein too.
Look, if you want to try this, and I think you want to because you've watched this video past the Met Eagle, so I think your tolerance to raw pork is pretty high now, just go talk to your local trusted butcher and maybe have him grind some fresh pork for you, some high quality fresh pork, and give it a shot. It's just really, really good. Thank you so much for watching. In the next video, we'll be eating raw giraffe and rhinoceros. No, of course, we will not be doing that. But thanks for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one.
You guys way too far. You're going way, way, way too much into the dark side. Hey, I believe it. I believe it. We have something in Puerto Rico called like jamón picao, or shredded ham. Like small cans, right? They're probably like that, 3 inches tall and wide, right? Small. Puerto Ricans in the comment section, if there's any of them, you know what I'm talking about. It's basically raw meat, a little bit of oil, and we usually eat it with cracker or bread. So I believe it. I believe that looks like a very nice meal to have between days, main dishes. But let me know what you guys think. Do you guys think it's good or it's bad? I would love to hear you guys' opinion. In the meantime, guys, I will see you in the next one.